For a man with 114 confirmed kills, the sky wasn't just a battlefield, it was a canvas, and his Bf-109 was the brush. Hauptmann Hedman Werner Schreuer was more than a pilot. He was an artist of aerial combat, a master of a deadly craft that had made the Luftwaffe the most feared air arm in the world. He understood the intricate dance of physics and instinct, the precise geometry of a deflection, shot the exact moment to break from a turn. He believed with the certainty of a religious conviction in the superiority of German engineering and German will. For him, victory wasn't just possible, it was a natural law. But on March 15th, 1943, at 25,000 feet above the German countryside, that law was about to be broken. As he climbed to intercept another formation of American bombers, his eyes caught something new on the horizon. Something wrong. These weren't the nimble Spitfires or the familiar P-38 seconds. These were monstrosities. Brutish barrel-chested fighters that seemed to defy every principle of aerodynamic grace. They didn't slice through the air. They bludgeoned it into submission with sheer, unapologetic power. The rumors from the high command had dismissed them as heavy, clumsy, and crude, typical American engineering. But seeing them now, silhouetted against the cold blue sky, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp as ice, pierced Schreuer's confidence. What you are about to witness is not just another dogfight. This is the story of a psychological collapse, the moment when one of Germany's greatest aces realized he wasn't fighting another pilot. He was fighting an entire country's industrial philosophy, manifested in 7 tons of steel and firepower. It's the story of a single 10-minute encounter that would expose a fatal flaw not in Germany's aircraft, but in its entire worldview. To truly understand how a war is lost, you have to find the moments that shattered the victor's morale. This is one of them. To make sure you don't miss these deep dives into the personal moments that changed history, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next as Schreuer rolls his fighter into the perfect attack position, convinced this will be an easy kill. Schreuer pushed his stick forward, diving toward the nearest P-47. His airspeed climbed rapidly, 400 kilometers per hour, 450,500. The distance closed quickly. At 400 meters, he lined up his gun sight on the massive American fighter. The pilot seemed unaware, flying straight and level. This would be easy. Schreuer's finger tightened on the trigger. His 20mm cannon roared to life, joined by his two 13mm machine guns. He saw the tracers arc through the air, striking the P-47's fuselage and wing roots. Bright flashes indicated hits. Any other fighter would have been torn apart, but the P-47 didn't explode. It didn't even seem to notice. The American fighter simply continued flying as if Schreuer's cannon shells were raindrops. Then, with terrifying speed for something so large, the P-47 snap-rolled to the left and climbed. Schreuer's veteran instincts screamed danger. He broke right, pulling hard on the stick. The Bf-109 responded instantly, its lightweight frame allowing a tight turn. But when Schreuer looked back, his blood froze. The P-47 hadn't fallen away. It was following him and closing the distance. This was wrong. Everything Schreuer knew about fighter combat said a heavier aircraft couldn't follow a lighter one in a turn. The laws of physics were absolute. Yet here was this American monster not just keeping up, but gaining. His altimeter unwound rapidly. 24,000 feet, 23,000, 22,000. Schreuer tried every trick he knew. Barrel rolls, split-S maneuvers, scissors. The Bf-109 was one of the most agile fighters in the world, but the P-47 stayed with him. Worse, at this altitude above 20,000 feet, the American fighter seemed to accelerate. Its engine was pulling maximum power, where his Daimler-Benz was gasping for air. Then he heard it, a sound like tearing canvas amplified 1,000 times. 8 Browning M2, 50 caliber machine guns all firing at once. Schreuer's Bf-109 shuddered as heavy slugs tore through his left wing. Red lights erupted on his instrument panel. Coolant temperature spiking, oil pressure dropping. One burst, just one burst from the P-47, and his fighter was crippled. Schreier pushed into a desperate dive trading altitude for speed. The P-47 followed effortlessly. At 15,000 feet, Schreier's engine began to seize. White smoke poured from his cowling. He had maybe 2 minutes before complete engine failure. Schreier's years of combat experience took over. He throttled back, trying to nurse the dying engine. Behind him, the P-47 closed to 200 meters. The American pilot could have finished him easily, but instead pulled alongside, matching Schreier's speed. For a brief moment, the two pilots made eye contact across the void. The American was young, maybe 22 years old. He didn't look triumphant or aggressive. He looked professional, almost bored. This terrified Schreier more than the guns pointed at him. To this American pilot, shooting down a Luftwaffe ace with 114 victories was just another day at work. The P-47 waggled its wings once, then pulled up and away, climbing back to altitude to rejoin the bomber escort. Schreier watched it go, his crippled Bf-109, barely maintaining level flight. The message was clear. You're not worth the ammunition. We have bigger targets. Schreier managed to glide his damaged fighter to a small Luftwaffe airfield near Kassel. As ground crew rushed to help him from the cockpit, he looked at the damage. 23 holes in his left wing, 5 in the fuselage. His coolant tank was shredded, his oil lines were severed. That night, Schreier sat in the officer's mess hand, still shaking. His wingman hadn't returned, neither had the other two pilots in his formation. 3 experienced pilots gone shot down by the P-47 seconds in less than 10 minutes. The squadron commander wanted a detailed report. Schreier described the encounter, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. The P-47's incredible durability, its speed at altitude, the devastating firepower, the way it had simply absorbed his cannon fire and kept flying. The commander listened, his face growing darker with each detail. Hauptmann, you're telling me that a single American fighter outperformed your entire formation? Schreier nodded slowly. Herr Oberst, it wasn't just better. It was from a different world. That aircraft represents a level of engineering and industrial capacity we cannot match. The commander's response was sharp. That's defeatist talk, Hauptmann. German fighters are superior. You've proven that with 114 victories. But Schreier shook his head. Those victories were against aircraft we understood. The P-47 changes everything. Over the following weeks, Schreier became obsessed with understanding his enemy. He requested every scrap of intelligence on the P-47 Thunderbolt. What he learned was more terrifying than the combat itself. The P-47 was powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine producing 2,000 horsepower. For comparison, his Bf-109's Daimler-Benz produced 1,475 horsepower at best. But raw power wasn't the whole story. The P-47 had something German engineers had tried and failed to perfect: a fully functional turbo supercharger system. This allowed the massive radial engine to maintain full power at altitudes where German fighters were struggling. The intelligence reports showed that at 25,000 feet, where Schreier had encountered the P-47, the American fighter was actually hitting its performance peak. Fast, powerful, and completely dominant in the high-altitude realm where German fighters had to operate to intercept bomber formations. But what haunted Schreier most was the durability. The P-47 had absorbed multiple 20mm cannon hits and continued fighting. He learned why the aircraft had extensive armor plating, a thick armored windscreen, and most importantly, that massive radial engine acted as a shield. Unlike his liquid-cooled inline engine, the P-47's radial had no vulnerable coolant system. Schreier requested a meeting with Luftwaffe Technical Intelligence. In a secure briefing room, an engineer showed him photographs of a captured P-47. "We've examined it thoroughly," the engineer said. "The engineering is extraordinary, but what's truly shocking is this." He slid a production report across the table. American factories are producing P-47 seconds at a rate of over 500 per month. By next year, they project 800 per month from a single factory complex. Schreier stared at the numbers. That's impossible. we produce maybe 300 to 400 single-engine fighters per month total across all types." The engineer nodded grimly. "It gets worse. The R2800 engine isn't just used in the P-47. It powers multiple American aircraft types. Total projected production of this single-engine model will exceed 125,000 units during the war." The number hit Schreier like a physical blow. Germany's entire aircraft engine production, all types across the entire war, would be roughly 250,000 units, most significantly less powerful. The Americans were building more of a single advanced engine type than Germany could produce total engines. The disparity wasn't just large, it was incomprehensible. Schreier wrote a detailed report for Luftwaffe High Command. He outlined the P-47's technical superiority, the production numbers, and his tactical recommendations. Avoid high-altitude engagement with P-47 seconds. Hit-and-run tactics only, except that continued attrition would result in unsustainable losses. The report was forwarded to Berlin. Weeks passed with no response. Finally, through informal channels, Schreier learned his report had been dismissed as overly pessimistic and potentially defeatist. One staff officer reportedly said, "This pilot has been demoralized by enemy propaganda. The P-47 is crude American engineering inferior to our designs." Schreier wasn't surprised. He'd seen this pattern throughout the war. Intelligence that contradicted Nazi ideology was rejected regardless of accuracy. German racial and cultural superiority was supposed to overcome any material disadvantage. Will and determination mattered more than industrial capacity. But Schreier knew the truth, in his gut, in his bones. From the moment that P-47 had absorbed his cannon fire and kept flying, he knew Germany wasn't losing a war of soldiers or tactics. They were losing a war of factories, and there was no amount of skill or courage that could overcome that. In the months following his encounter, Schreier watched his predictions come true. P-47 seconds appeared in increasing numbers over Europe. German fighter losses mounted steadily. Experienced pilots were shot down and not replaced. The young replacements arriving at his squadron had maybe 30 hours of flight training compared to the hundreds of hours he'd received. The tactical recommendations he'd made, avoiding high-altitude engagements and using hit-and-run tactics, were slowly adopted by surviving pilots. But by then, it was too late. The Americans had achieved air superiority through sheer weight of numbers and technical advantage. German fighters were forced to pick their battles carefully, avoiding fights they couldn't win. Schreier flew his last combat mission in October 1943. By then, American fighter escorts had made daylight bomber interception nearly suicidal. He was transferred to a training unit tasked with preparing the next generation of German pilots. It was a bitter assignment. He was teaching young men to fly aircraft that were outmatched, with tactics that barely worked against an enemy with overwhelming superiority. One evening, a young lieutenant approached him after a training session. "Herr Hauptmann, is it true you shot down 114 enemy aircraft?" Schreier nodded slowly. "Then we can still win." "Yes, German pilots are the best in the world." Schreier looked at the eager young face and felt a wave of sadness. "Listen carefully," Schreier said. "Those 114 victories came against aircraft and pilots we understood. We fought enemies who were brave, but whose nations couldn't replace their losses as quickly as we could inflict them. That war is over." The young pilot's face fell. "But we're still fighting." "No," Schreier said quietly. "We're dying. There's a difference. The Americans aren't just sending better pilots or better aircraft. They're sending a level of industrial power that makes everything we do meaningless. For every P-47, we shoot down 10 more across the Atlantic. For every pilot, they lose 20 more complete training." He walked to a window overlooking the airfield, where a handful of Bf-109 seconds sat many with visible damage and makeshift repairs. "You asked if German pilots are the best in the world. Maybe we are. Maybe we're the most skilled, the most experienced, the bravest. It doesn't matter. We're fighting an enemy that doesn't need to be better. They just need to be everywhere all the time with aircraft that won't die when we shoot them." The lieutenant stood silent, processing this. Finally, he asked, "When did you know we'd lost Schreier?" Thought back to that day in March at 25,000 feet, watching a P-47 absorb his cannon fire and keep flying. The moment I couldn't kill one of them, and realized there were thousands more where it came from. In the end, Werner Schreuer's story isn't just about one German pilot meeting one American fighter. It is the epitaph for an entire generation of warriors. It is about the moment when sublime skill and hard-won experience collided with an industrial reality so vast, so overwhelming, that it rendered them irrelevant. Schreuer's shattered confidence in the cockpit of his crippled Bif 109 was a mirror reflecting the fate of the entire Luftwaffe. They were not outflown or outfought in the traditional sense. They were submerged by an unstoppable tide of steel, oil, and aluminum forged in the heart of America. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't merely an aircraft. It was a concept made real. It was the physical manifestation of an idea that Germany's high command refused to accept modern warfare is not won by the bravest soldiers or the most skilled pilots. It is won by factories, by resource extraction, by logistics, by the brutal arithmetic of industrial capacity. Germany had built an ideology on the myth that racial superiority and sheer will could overcome any material disadvantage. The P-47 and the thousands upon thousands that followed it proved that myth catastrophically wrong with every .50 caliber round it fired. The history books remember the battles, the dates, and the generals. But it is in these personal moments of shattering realization that the true story of the war is told. These stories of individual awakening in the face of overwhelming odds deserve to be remembered not as tales of victory or defeat, but as profound lessons in the nature of human conflict. If you believe these deep dives into the moments that changed everything are compelling, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and have hit the notification bell. Join our community as we continue to uncover the history you were never taught in school. Thank you for watching.